BC, kind of go on that thought. Like, are you either surprised at all, or I guess I don't really know the word for it, but how do you process the fact that Coach Rule seems willing to use kind of what I was talking about, kind of the philosophy of sports and life, to do these recruiting pitches and give the athletes enough credit that they don't just need to be blinded by all the bells and whistles and all this stuff where it's like, oh, look how many uniform combinations we have or whatever. It's like, hey, like you can win recruits with real life stuff. I don't know that that's something we see a ton in college recruiting.
Yeah, I thought Sean Patton said an interesting thing last week when he was talking about, obviously the shiny stuff is nice, but then it's like how the people behind the scenes like can help you with that stuff, like what actually the ins and outs of like the sports science department, or like what we were talking about with the director of nutrition, Kristen Coggan, just having that session where you're teaching them some things and then they have a fun competition and all that. I know that some of that stuff, when you talk to the recruits, is very unique to their visits compared with other places. And it does separate yourself, I think, and it connects in a way with those guys where they're like, they're not, this is not being dumbed down at all for me. They are excited about what I can bring to the table, and they want to teach me everything that I can grow from here. And so I think it's a very good process. And Damon's been on the tour, so he can speak. He could speak with expertise to it, but I don't know how many different stations they hit up along the way on their official visit. But I've always thought it'd be a fascinating story to like go, in which I might do at some point, go talk with each person that does a station about sort of their presentation and all that, if they'd let me. I think it's a very cool thing, and it's part of their success recruiting, no doubt.
It was incredible. And I don't know if he's done this before. It seemed impromptu, but I don't put anything past Coach Rule in terms of planning. He kind of just he didn't cut in, but he took a little bit of time during Kristen's nutrition display to explain the difference between some differences when on recruiting visits, when people talk about family and home and this, that, and the other. And he said, it was incredible, BC. He said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you why you should come to Nebraska. We're here to help you find a home. Right? Like, and he gave this analogy, he said, we kind of grew up, it was a little meager, it was a little tough. Some of my other friends had some other things. He said, there were times where I would find myself jealous of things or some stuff. Like maybe I wanted a different TV. I never had a TV in my room, or maybe I wanted, their house looked better than mine. He said, but I was never jealous or wanted anybody else's home. My home and what it consisted of inside was the most important thing to me. I want to help you find a home. And BC, it sounded kind of simple. And it was only about 3 or 4 minutes with his analogies, but the room momentarily, you could tell, just went silent. Right? Like people were like giving it pause, because his pitch wasn't on why you should come to Nebraska. It's what you should look for in choosing a school. You know what I mean? And I've heard him say it's the same thing the staff told Christian. It's the same thing they told Caleb. It's like, we're not here to sell you on us. We're going to give you the attributes of what we are, and then you go do with the information what you will and get back to us. Like he's willing to do that.
No, that's really interesting, because it kind of connects the unseen to yesterday. I was interviewing Broderick Scholl, who of course was on the trip this weekend, the big lineman from Oklahoma.
Great kid. Great kid.
Yeah. And he's an interesting kid, I think, with a cool background, but the biggest thing to him was the family aspect. That's what he stressed in the whole interview, was the family feel. Said there was a different connection at Nebraska compared to most other places between coaches and their players, or the coaches and the prospects. But what you're speaking about in that story told kind of connects to what he was saying just about how it just made such an impression on him, and was going to give him a tough decision. I don't know what he's got some good options on the table for himself, and we'll see what he does. But I know Nebraska made it tough on him, so to speak, in a good way, because of exactly what you're saying, because he felt that. So that's interesting to hear that part of it, though. It kind of connects the dots for me when you do these interviews, and you don't know all the specifics, of course, of what happens behind the scenes, but you can kind of now you put it together a little bit.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson of Husker 24/7. BC, does it kind of connect to that conviction that we see from Rule about the way he runs his program
and recruits?
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising he recruits that way too, because all he's really saying is the same thing that we hear when he's talking about current players is like, hey, this is who we are and this is what we do. And if that's not for you, that's okay. But this is how things are going to be here. And so, it kind of lends itself to it. You're almost, again, I said this before when he was talking about stuff after spring, he's kind of giving you permission not to choose Nebraska, but he's also giving you the information to know that, like, if this is what you're looking for, Nebraska is the perfect place for you.
Yeah. And making it clear you're not just the name on the board. I always think of the, at the end of a season, the old Friday Night Lights scene where Billy Bob takes off the name and puts up another name, and it's like you got to build your two deep again. This would be the anti of that. It's that sort of like we're about you, the person. Obviously, we're here to win games, and we want to build you up as a player, and we're going to develop you in that way too. But all these other aspects that you're going through as you go through this tour and you're looking at the campus life, we want you to have that enriching experience and grow you that way and feel like this, like Damon was saying, this is your home. If it's real, and it definitely seems real with the way they speak on it, guys can usually tell, and you'll usually get the right type of players over time that want to be a part of that. And you'll have some that pass up, and there's other good options out there. Let's not pretend there aren't, but there's no question right now. I feel like Nebraska's got some off-season momentum, and not just with the facility, but with the people that are surrounding it. And Rule, when you listen to him in interviews, feels very comfortable with his staff, and that each person can kind of crush their job and do it to the best of their abilities. And that's a good place to be right now. And now you gotta just take that next step from there.
BC, it's interesting because I'm curious to get Scholl's thoughts on Donnie Raiola, because outside of Satterfield, I think this weekend probably but kind of their personalities inside those walls were probably the most different from what you see on the outside. Very businesslike at the podium and contrite. He's a fantastic recruiter. I watched him probably more than anyone of the staff. He's amazing. I had to text Dom about halfway through it, and I was like, hey, man, I apologize. I know you're at graduation, but, man, your brother is, and then I'd say something, and he's like, bro, he's the best in the business. What? Like, I know this. Like, that was basically that was kind of basically his response, but I was just like, he was incredible. And I looked at you look at the roster and kind of their talent. The O-line is the place where, I mean, those guys got some bling to them in terms of stars and development. He's way better than I think we think he is, really.
Well, he's definitely changed the conversation about him, hasn't he? Like, not
amazing. Yes.
There,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, you think about
from this time last year to this time this year.
Oh, 100%.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially like December, January of that first month or whatever, and Rule, and they're like, we're gonna keep Donnie as the one guy, and everybody's like, what? Like it was, and now you look back at it, and I don't want to like wag my finger. I wasn't too tough on that decision, but some were. I don't want to wag my finger at it, but I think it was kind of silly to be overly tough on Raiola for the first year anyway, considering the bizarre circumstances that were sort of unfolding as he was the O-line coach that initial season. But that showed some, good foresight from Matt Rule and Marcus Satterfield, by the way, who, if you remember, was key. Like, I remember when we first met Marcus Satterfield, he talked about the first time he met Donovan Raiola and how they just had this long conversation. And he's like, he walked over a Rule. He's like, you got to keep this guy.
Yeah, because I think the intent was to not.
Well, I mean, Rule said as much.
Well,
Rule has said as much that he did not intend to keep him.
Yeah. So, I mean, but obviously some of what you saw was unveiled there, off the bat, and it has paid off. Now they got to keep rolling. I mean, we're in that time where everything's pretty good, and they got to take that next step as an offensive line. But I think the recruiting part for sure. I mean, just the guys they're in on, the guys they've landed. Where you get Grant Bricks last cycle, and I've liked, like, I could go through the list of guys on the O-line the last 2 cycles, and I like all the potential there. So he has a no nonsense way when he's on the field, but I can believe what you're saying. Like, you get him off to the side, and I think he could cut it up, and it'd just be pretty good. Connecting with those guys in a fun way too. I mean, it has always been one of the closest rooms on the team. They say that, but also other position groups have said that about the O-line too. Like, so there's some truth to it. So that has to come from the coach of that group being sort of multifaceted, and I think that's showing up to more and more people now.
That's a great call, BC. I was asking some of the guys in the strength and conditioning program that have the particular units. Like, hey, I'm the O-line, D-line guy, and I'm the DB guy, whatever. And I was just asking them, I'm trying to learn for what I'm doing in high school, right? So I'm asking them about camaraderie and chemistry. And almost to a man, they're like, nobody moves as one, like the offensive line. He said their symmetry and cohesiveness and their ability to just do things kind of as a unit, he said, is unparalleled. I thought that was... And I mean, you may say, duh, because they're O-line and they have to work together, but there's
always like that.
It's not, and there's a lot of them, and it's just, I don't know, man. Nobody batted an eye at how Coach Raiola has them thinking as a unit.
Yeah, he's definitely changed the conversation. I mean, even last year before the season, I remember Stephon Wynn, who left, but he was doing an interview and he was like, those guys like dress the same, and they're like, they go everywhere together.
So remember when people would cry about how he, t-shirts, like he wanted everything the same in the weight room, and people thought he was like the Gestapo or something. It's just like, oh man, this is just how we roll.
Yeah, there's a purpose to it. But I mean, there's definitely been a change there, and now it's making that next move on the field, and I thought they made progress last year. I think one of the reasons I feel like people have been cautiously optimistic, but the biggest reason for the optimism with the fan base a lot of times is how it feels like it's shifted on both sides of the ball in the trenches. Like, there was a feeling at this time a year ago with the D line, there were some guys who went in the portal and was like, okay, what's this going to look like? How's it all going to come together? At that point, Nash was like a fringe guy as far as snaps. Like, in his career, he hadn't been that every down guy. You didn't know what that was going to look like. Within like a month of the season, people are pretty convinced, man, this D-line is trending well and they've got some depth. And then you started to pick up, there's progress going on with that O-line too. And now, to me, it's like, can that O-line kind of make that, I think, kind of the step the D-line made last year where it's to that level, like on the field as well. I thought they're okay and sometimes pretty good, but now it's like going up 2 steps from that. But that's, I think, why there's some optimism, is because there has been a feeling like where it counts on the trenches, Nebraska's shown some improvement, even though the record didn't necessarily show it.
BC, real quick, about 30 seconds here. Tell me about TJ Lateef, the quarterback commit.
Well, first, I just think it's awesome, Ravi, that a guy wants to come and compete. Like he says, like if they say it's a true competition, I believe them. Let's go, and I'll challenge myself with that. And I think he's got all the tools. Nebraska couldn't shoot an air ball this class on the quarterback position, and they hardly did that. They went and got a 4-star guy who makes your room better. And I always say, quarterback, any position, it doesn't work just like we always say, where we write it down like, oh, is a quarterback for 3 years, then it's going to be this guy for 2 and this guy for 1. Sometimes we like to map this thing out like it happens like that. It doesn't always, or it rarely does. So I like the guy says, you know what? I like the coaches. I like the surroundings at this place. I believe in my skill set. I know this other guy's here, but I'm going to go be part of that too. And it'll work itself out. And it was a big get for Nebraska. And, it's good for the class too to have that. It's always good when you have that QB centerpiece as part of it.
Yeah.
That the other guys are kind of, in their text box with and everything. That matters. It definitely does.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, B.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.